Good evening, Sanbonani Dumelang, and welcome to episode 136 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Uzamantungwa Kumalo. It's a Tuesday edition of the Private Property Podcast, and as usual, we're going to be tackling something that so many of us tend to have a lot of questions about. I know that we keep coming back to this topic because a lot of us are finding ourselves living in these kinds of situations, and we often don't quite know what it means. But before we get into that, of course, welcome. If you're joining us for the first time, then do welcome to the Private Property Podcast. I do hope that you'll be not only watching us in future, but also, of course, watching some of our really great past episodes. And of course, I do hope that you're also going to be listening and watching some of the great shows that we have in store for you. And of course, I'm talking about the farming podcast that, played earlier today at 1 o'clock. And of course, is going to be coming back on your screens on Thursday afternoon at 1 o'clock with Umbali. That's certainly one of the podcasts you want to tune into on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1 o'clock across our social media platforms that explores farming and the various ways that you can get into farming, the various opportunities that are into farming, and some of the different young players who are, playing a role in farming and almost the next generation of farmers. And of course, another really great show that we have is the First Time Home Buyers show that comes to your screens every Wednesday at 7:45. So that's just after the Private Property Podcast. Of course, ST brings you that show. And of course, it is for new time home buyers. There's always so much you can learn as a first timer. And if you are in the market for the first time, this certainly is the show that you do not want to miss out. And on weekends, we never leave you alone. We've got the Developers Show, where we really do showcase some of the best estates and complexes that this country has to offer. So if you're ever on the market and you want to suss out what is out there, then do make sure that you tune into the weekend shows that we have in store for you. So as you can see, we've always got a lot on our buffet that you can pick from, not just during the week, but also on weekends and during the day. So you have no excuse of not getting your finger on the pulse on all things property. And that's exactly what we're doing this evening on the Private Property Podcast with myself, Uzamantungwa Kumalo, where we're asking you, do you belong to a homeowners association? Well, here's everything you need to know about your rights. We'll be exploring your rights when you live in the event where you live in a homeowners association, but also what your responsibilities are. And I'm sure some people at home are thinking, okay, what is a homeowners association? Well, it's something we have touched on, and that's exactly what we're going to be exploring. And my guest this evening is Kathleen Dlepu, who is the founder and director at Molefe Dlepu Attorneys. Good evening, Kathleen, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, Zama, and good evening to the participants. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much for making time to speak to us, Kathleen. I think before we even look at what the rights of people who live in homeowners associations effectively are, let's perhaps start with what is a homeowners association, because sometimes people tend to find themselves living in those setups, but they're not actually aware that this is what they've just signed up to. I mean, I often see a lot of people, especially on my social media platforms, saying they bought a place, they were not aware. Now they're, getting billed and charged, and there are all kinds of rules that they're being sent, or they're being told that they're breaking rules when they weren't essentially aware of what it means to move into a place that's run by a homeowners association. Perhaps explain to us what exactly is a homeowners association.
Okay, thank you, Zama. Firstly, I just want to tell the listeners that property ownership has evolved in South Africa. There are different types of property ownership. There was the conventional one where it's freehold. Now the estates and the sectional titles have gained momentum. So property developments you see along the highway, anywhere you see these beautiful estates. That's where actually those are the estates that where you have a homeowners association. This type of the homeowners association, it's individual members who have bought into an estate, and they become a community, where each member owns a house and a stand, on which you are built, that stand is built on. The owners are members you become automatically a member. Once you buy, and the property is registered in your name, you become a member of the Homeowners Association. So the Homeowners Association actually they register a company. It's a non-profit company, and with all in terms of the company laws of South Africa. Then it has a memorandum of incorporation, Then it has the rules, But one of the things about the Homeowners Association environment is that it actually somehow erodes your rights to your absolute rights to your property. But it's people love it, it depends. I always say, if you are a free-spirited person, you must think carefully before you go there, so and make sure that you understand what you are getting into, right? So it's a sort of a communal living, and it's beautiful for people who are, who really love that type of environment. So it's just that.
And Kathleen, you actually mentioned that in some ways, HOAs erodes an individual's rights. Perhaps explain a little bit about that, because I can already sense people thinking, yeah, I didn't know this and now I can't do this. And even saying that it probably lends itself so beautifully to people perhaps who like rigidity a little bit. So if you're free-spirited, you like doing what you kind of want to do, perhaps it's not the best fit for you. Perhaps explain a little bit about how it potentially erodes. And I know you're not using that word in its most literal sense, but how in effect it essentially erodes a little bit of your rights, because you really want to get the viewers to get a thorough understanding of what it means to then live in a homeowners association, because I think we do get quite a shock. I mean, I know I moved in our case, it's not a homeowners association, it's about a corporate structure. And luckily, I mean, I'd done a little bit of research, so I kind of had a little bit of a sense of how things would go. But then you realize that there's so many rules, some of them you probably don't quite agree with. So how exactly does that effectively work?
As I've said, a homeowners association is normally a company. They register a company, it's a non-profit making company in terms of the company laws. And that company, it actually comes with rules and regulations of what members can do. As I say, each member is a member of that company. You are entitled to be voted in, to be a director into that company, but the company makes rules and regulations of how this place is going to be run. So members, their rights is that as a member, you'll have voting rights. You are entitled to be elected as a director. You are entitled to be given information, the financial information about the company. You are entitled to vote. You are entitled to be invited to meetings, to check everything, the finances and everything. But you have obligations. As much as you have that, remember you've got your house, and you've got neighbors. At least you've got a garden. It's unlike a sectional title, which is, you share the common property. Here, the company runs the maintenance of the common property. But your property itself, you are responsible for it. You are responsible for the insurance, you are responsible for the cleaning, the gardening, But unfortunately, the company makes rules and regulations and how this environment, people living in this environment, because it's your choice. You choose to be in that secure property and feel that. But unfortunately, at the same time, you find people you don't know, unlike a freehold property where you still have freehold property, you still have rights, but obligations, but not as stringent as when you're in a homeowners association environment. For instance, the company will make rules and regulations to ensure a harmonious, communal living. You are obliged to be, and you are responsible for your own insurance, to your house, maintenance and repair to your own structure. And you are, for the company to run and enhance the estate, you pay levies. Each person, each member has to pay levies, monthly levies, which are set by the company. And the levies is for the upkeep of the roads, the upkeep of maybe if there's a golf course of that, or the upkeep of the clubhouse, and make sure that there's a security to pay the employees of the security company or whatever they choose. But at the same time, this company still can also appoint a managing agent, although it has directors. They can appoint a managing agent who runs all these things. The managing agent reports to the directors of the company. The directors report to the members. So the levies, you are responsible for the expenditure of, if they want to make a wall around the property, all members chip in. You have to pay. They set an amount that you need to pay, but these amounts are set at an AGM. Members vote for that, and it's compulsory. Unfortunately, once you are part of this, it's compulsory for these levies. You cannot run away from them unless you sell and go out. And most of them, they have this architectural guidelines. You can't build a house of this type. If they don't want, if you can't have a pink house and a yellow house and whatever, it is like, sometimes they are rules. They'll say, to enhance our estate, we need maybe gray looking, and actually the design must be like this. So basically, that's what actually you are buying into. So they have their own architect. Remember, the developer is the one who came with this development. They'll have an architecture. If you want to make improvements to your property, the architecture needs to check whether it aligns itself with the ambience of that estate. So if it doesn't, unfortunately, you cannot. Those are some of the things that you can't do.
And Kathleen, I actually want to talk a little bit about, especially the architecture bit, because I've heard of cases where, home buyers, you buy a stand, it's a lavish estate that you want to live in, perhaps it might even be a golf estate, and you're thinking you want to, build your dream mansion. And of course, when you buy that land, you would have been sent the specs in terms of, the architectural guidelines, but you probably had this idea of the kind of house that you wanted to build for yourself. I know of a case in one of the very posh estates here in Joburg North, where the owners went and bought the stand, built a house, and even as you drive in that estate, that house aesthetically doesn't look like the other houses. It literally stands out like a sore thumb. And there's now a court case where they tried to amicably resolve it, but it didn't work out. And now it's essentially gone to court to say, well, we're very clear about how we want the estate to look. And this person has now gone and built and even painted in the color that we don't allow, because they even have a color scheme in place. That house is yellow. Every other house is, a shade of gray. Exactly, yes. Gray or charcoal. And this one is a yellow. And so even the roof, because they'll even say this is the kind of roof you must use. They don't want tiled roofs because there's a particular aesthetic that they're going for the estate. In events like that, how would you sort of kind of talk the client, and the client now being, of course, the person who's bought the land and bought the apartment, to almost talk them down? Because essentially the estate has communicated all of these, but you go and build kind of your own thing. So how would you almost warn consumers to not get themselves into situations like that? Because you certainly don't want to have to spend so much money, buying land. Already land in these, estates is not cheap. Building in those estates, even when you're not building to their specs, is not cheap. And then now you're going to be building, off script, essentially, and potentially getting yourself in legal battles. How do you help people almost understand the gravity of, signing up essentially for living in HOAs?
Zama, buying a property is the most important step in some of our lives, Before you can decide to buy, you must investigate and understand what you want as a person. Normally, you get approached by estate agent. You go to an estate agent who has to sit down with you and explain. I always say, you are better off spending 1,000 rands to go to an attorney with that type of an agreement to try and understand, because they'll take you through what the do's and don't, Estate agents sometimes do that, but sometimes they want to sell, But I think for you, you must actually understand what you are buying into, because you cannot say after having bought into that you say, I didn't understand, because the rules are there. firstly, if you buy into a homeowners association environment, you must go and check their rules, right?
Yep.
You must check their memorandum of incorporation as a company. They must explain, sit down with some of the directors, or maybe if they have a company secretary, and understand what am I buying into, you know? So that before you put that signature, you must know that you cannot build a house which is not like the others. Sometimes they give you about 5 plans or 6 plans to choose from. You know, they say you can buy, you can actually. So once you have chosen and signed, unfortunately, you cannot. Unfortunately, the clients you're talking about, it's unfortunate because they're going to be fighting all the way, because homeowners, definitely.
Yeah.
It's costly to do that, and yeah.
And Kathleen, I want us to take a quick break. And when we come back, I want us to explore some of the responsibilities that people who live in HOAs also have. Because I think one of the big things, and it's different schools of thought, I've heard people say for them, it's slightly better to live in a homeowners association than to live in a sectional title, because they just find that just lands itself slightly better because you're dealing with your own yard and your own house. You don't have to rely on, the body corporate administering that. So you're only really contributing to the upkeep of the common areas, but your area is yours and you deal with that. Whereas others are like, actually don't even want to have to deal with, my own garden. I want somebody else to be administering that. I want insurance to be externally administered and not be something that I deal with directly. I'd also actually want to find out after the break, Kathleen, about, some of the interesting, we'll say, legal battles that you've seen people get themselves into, or maybe legal difficulties that people find themselves in when it comes to living in a HOA, and perhaps they find out after the fact that this is something that has happened and they're trying to find ways to potentially remedy it. And to our viewers at home, I want to find out from you, are you living in a homeowners association and probably found out about some of the rules and the regulations, after the fact? What were some of them? Were you able to essentially come to terms with the reality that this is how things are right now, until, of course, you probably become one of the directors and potentially garner enough support to have some of them changed? Or did you kind of just concede and accept that this is the status quo and found ways to essentially live with it? I certainly want to hear from your experience. Do share them with us below. We'll be taking your questions and comments just after this break. Welcome back to the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Uzamanto Kumalo. It's a Tuesday edition of the Private Property Podcast. And this evening, we are, of course, welcoming a lot of our viewers, whether you're watching us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, or on Twitter. And of course, welcome to the Top Fan Gang on Facebook, as well as across our other social media platforms. We are looking at, do you belong to a homeowners association? Well, here's everything you need to know about your rights. I think so many people sometimes find themselves living in a homeowners association and not understanding or fully, having a grip of the legal implications of living in such a setup, or perhaps you've moved from sectional title, you've never even lived in any kind of community scheme living, and so this is your first really rodeo of living in a community scheme, and you're having to get a gist of what it means, what your rights effectively are, what the managing agent are allowed to do, not allowed to do, what the directors can or cannot do, and really trying to get an understanding of what your responsibility also is in that homeowners association. My guest this evening is Kathleen Dlepu, who is the founder and director of Molefe Dlepu Attorneys, who's really helping us understand the legal implications and some of the things we probably shouldn't do. And to take your questions and comments, I see on Instagram, we've got comments. First one here coming from Colin_Bach, who asks, but how did the plans get approved? Because before the plans goes to the municipality, they first go to Homeowners Association for approval. And I see that Garabo Sky is also saying, I'm curious about the approval of the plans as well. And you know what, I'm not going to mention which particular estate this one is. It is one of the very big, very expensive ones. And like I said, when you drive around, you see that the house looks different. I mean, one of the big things that looks very different, for example, is the roofing and then the color of the house. So I don't know how it would have passed, because I know that even the architectural team, you know, in that particular estate, I mean, having interacted with them quite a bit, they are quite, I'll say, strict on obviously what their specs are. They communicate that quite well. So there's no confusion, certainly when you're buying a stand. I mean, their stands are still on sale. They still have other areas within that estate that they're going to be opening up. And so you're not confused when you're buying that this is what you're essentially signing up for. I mean, a friend of mine and I actually joked about it because he had a bit of, you know, knowledge, background, context about it, almost saying that it's a millionaire's pissing contest, you know, where you know that you've got the money to fight it, you've already spent millions of rands, and it's almost literally a pissing contest. So I don't know, it's maybe they put in the right plans, and chances are that the structure of the house itself, that's approved. They just probably changed the roof and then of course painted the incorrect color because structurally it doesn't look different really. It's just the roofing and essentially the color. So the odds are they probably at some point said, you know what, change the roof, make it something different. And then of course you're going to have to raise questions also about the firm that they then used, because I know they're also quite strict about who you should be using when you're building in that particular estate. So I think it's one of those people with a lot of money problems that a lot of us typically don't have, because you're not going to get yourself into something like that, especially when you are aware and when the developer communicates a lot of these things up front. Now, Kathleen, I did say that, you know, I certainly want to get a sense from you about some of the legal issues that, you know, homeowners or home buyers sometimes tend to find themselves in when they live in homeowners association that you've probably come across, that you can maybe share with us so that we're able to just avoid them. Because I think sometimes you might not be as aware that this is, you know, potentially something you could, you know, get yourself into that could have legal ramifications. So have you seen something that has happened from a homeowner's perspective who then started living in a homeowners association?
Okay, thank you. I think one of the issues that come up a lot is the issue of security. You know, if you're the security company of the homeowners association, and if you are not happy with it, how do you deal with it? You know, but most of the rules and they have a dispute resolution mechanism in it. You know, so if you are unhappy, there's always members meetings. You can hold meetings as members to change some of the rules if it doesn't suit you. But another thing, another one is actually the access. You know, you may find, you know, with us blacks, we've got a lot of family members, and you know, they want access into the property. And if they allow you maybe I mean, the rules will say they can only give you 4 access cards for you, your husband, and the children. You know, the other ones have to sign in. You know, so those are the things normally where you should find that people didn't understand what the rules meant. And the others is for the pets. You know, you think maybe you can have a small pet and only find the rules and, you know, don't allow pets, you know, and the obligations, some of them they do, like cats, but very few do that, you know. But what really sometimes worries me is those estates, especially where next to a nature reserve, you know, because there are certain, you cannot kill certain animals. I'm just imagine if you see a snake, you can't kill it. You know, you have to call the homeowners association. They also have people ready to deal with it, but it's I mean, your first reaction is to, I'm going to kill this, you'll kill the snake or strip or do something, you know. But those are the little things that really, you know, people tend to be fighting about.
Yeah, and I can imagine. I've certainly heard of that. Even here, we've actually had a few snake incidents because we are close to a park. And luckily, I mean, they're now trying to find a solution for it because we're effectively not supposed to have snakes inside our own community because we're not a nature reserve, you know, ourselves. But you do tend to find quite a lot of those. And I think the pet one tends to be so contagious. I mean, I'm very big on living in communities where they don't allow dogs because I can't stand the barking. You can't pet a dog. So a cat I'm okay with. So I think even those little things become so important for you as a buyer to get a sense of, are you like a huge pet person? And if you are, then don't go signing up for, you know, living in a community where you're not going to essentially be allowed to own a dog, because that's something that's just not going to fly. You know, Kathleen, before we wrap up our conversation, I mean, I think any tips for people who are about to buy into Homeowners Association? I mean, we already know that there are different kinds of sectional of community scheme living. And as I said earlier, I've certainly found people who prefer Homeowners Association than, for example, sectional titles. And it really does have its perks depending how you are, especially because you have quite a bit of freedom with your own sort of house and your yard. So I think that sometimes in relative terms tends to appeal to people. So any final tips you'd like to share with our viewers at home when it comes to just understanding what their rights are when they're about to buy into a Homeowners Association?
I think for me, it's always important to do your research, you know, to understand I mean, you know yourself. As I said, free-spirited people, you know, you need to start knowing that you're going to be restricted somehow. You know, you're living with other people. It's not like you'll have a party that ends at 12 midnight, you know. So you'd rather understand the place you're going to be living in. Make sure that you read the rules. Somebody must explain. If you can actually even ask the people who are staying around there, what are the advantages and the disadvantages. But normally, a lot of people get property through estate agents. Make sure that your estate agent explains each and every clause in that agreement. Otherwise, then you end up signing something that you didn't bargain for. So as I said, it doesn't make any harm to pay a few hundreds to go to an attorney and for him to explain the contract, the rights and obligations, then sign and go after. You know, that will be a very expensive exercise.
And I think perhaps if you can just, you know, briefly touch on, and you mentioned it about how various homeowners association would have a dispute mechanism or a way in which you are able to almost escalate any issues. Perhaps share with our viewers sort of the best practice where, in the event where they do have a particular issue that they want to raise with their homeowners association, you know, almost the best practice way to who do they first communicate with before trying to escalate it all the way up to CSOs?
Mostly the rules, you may find there's a mediation clause. So for instance, if you have your differences with your neighbors, you know, they can have a mediation clause where the homeowner, the directors, you appoint your own mediators to try and resolve the problem. And especially it happens in issues of noise, you know, and where you become unreasonable, park on the neighbor's driveway, and it's a repeated, you know, action that you do. So normally they'll have that, you know, mediation clause. If it doesn't, then you'll have to go for arbitration. So they'll go for arbitration only if after that, then, you know, you can actually take them. Because those alternative dispute resolution clauses actually assist you, because court and going to court is very expensive. So you'd rather use those mechanisms, you know, and express your views in the members. Attend meetings. You must attend those meetings to air your views and be part of rule making in that environment that you are in.
Kathleen, we're going to leave it there. And I actually love that oftentimes I think it's because a lot of us probably grew up in, freestanding houses where there are no rules really, you kind of do as you want. So you're not contributing to something that by the time we're doing, communal living, there's so many new aspects to it that isn't just about sharing a space with people, but it's also about understanding that there are rules, there are responsibilities, and mediating in the event where, there's conflict, that there's so many things that sometimes you end up not, attending meetings, as you're saying. I think that is one of the crucial things, that do attend the meetings, do be involved, because ultimately it's the community that you're living in. You're helping shape how it's going to be, whether it's, the security that's going to be there, some of the amenities that are going to be added, because you find over the years, you're upgrading the Homeowners Association, certainly the common areas. So the moment you're getting yourself into some of the decision-making, we'll say roles within the scheme, it certainly does make, or rather within the association, it really does make quite a big difference. Kathleen, we're going to leave it there this evening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
And that is Kathleen Dlepu, who's the founder and director of Molefe Dlepu Attorneys. And of course, if you do end up having some of those legal disputes, we have, put their contact details down here below. Of course, you want to avoid it having to go that far. I think one of the big things is, as Kathleen has shared with us, is you want to bring in a mediator and see what the mediation clauses in your particular homeowners association essentially is, then try that route first. I think legal action is so costly. And sometimes it's really just about when neighbors, and I mean, I've picked it up, we don't do it as much now. If anything, my mother gets shocked that we tend to not know our neighbors. We don't know your neighbors' names. I mean, luckily we greet, but just the small concept of know who your neighbors are. And if possible, maybe be able to go ask them for sugar when you run out of sugar at an ungodly hour. And it really sometimes is about going back to those basics, because the moment you host something and you need that extra little bit of parking, you're able to let your neighbors know, and it doesn't end up causing a raucous where people get, reported to the Homeowners Association. So it really is about us almost getting to know each other just a little bit. We don't need to be friends, but certainly being cordial with each other. We are, of course, living in the same community, so you almost don't want to dislike the people that you are living with. Well, that certainly is from us here on the Private Property Podcast. And for myself, Uzamantunga, and the rest of the team, thank you so much for joining us across our social media platforms. We're back again, of course, tomorrow with the Wednesday edition of the show, where we're going to be having the ABSA Home Loan team, as usual, as we do every single Wednesday. So do get your questions and comments ready, especially because we always have the right experts who's able to answer our financial questions. And having that financial mind, and certainly somebody from a financial institution, always comes in steady, especially right now, as we want to find out more about how the banks are viewing our applications, how the banks are assessing us in the event where you want to get a second or a third bond, and really getting a better understanding of how those things work. Well, it's a wrap from us here on the Private Property Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're back again tomorrow. And as usual, hoping you're staying home and staying safe.
March, and I'm part of the SA Women's Hockey team. And I'm the technical director of Tuks Hockey. And I'm also the assistant coach for the first team ladies. I moved to Ferry Glen about 5 years ago. Ferry Glen is a really safe place and the people are really kind. Some of my friends live really close by in suburbs like Equestria and Olympus. In the morning I will wake up, make myself a cup of coffee, go for a jog in the Ferry Glen Nature Reserve or even just in the neighborhood. It's safe, quiet, and the environment is really nice. I love Ferry Glen because I'm near the city but I'm not in the city. I like to go to Pretoria Country Club to clear my mind, on my own, to relax and just to enjoy a round of golf. In Pretoria East we really have nice places to visit like Menlyn Mall and Brooklyn Mall that is really close by. There are also a lot of top schools in the area like Pretoria Boys High and Hoërskool Menlo Park. One of the most beautiful places to see the whole of Pretoria is the Fort Kapperkop viewpoint. And that's my neighborhood.